haven't had a chance to meet yet. I see a lot of familiar faces from last week, and as we did last week, this week is an opportunity for us to have an open house and talk about the redevelopment of 4719 Farwell Street. This is the second proposal that the village received following an RFP process last year. It's from Horizon Development Group. Similar to what we have done in the past, we'll allow them a chance to make a presentation, explain the project, try to walk you through what they've proposed thus far, offer an opportunity for people to ask questions when they get done with that, and then at the end, if there's any additional sort of informal discussion that we want to have once that's done, we can have that as well. But for everyone's information, just ask that they speak into one of the microphones, just so we're recording this. It's on TV, so people at home who couldn't make it can watch it and still provide comments. Additionally, we have some comment forms at the front door that you could provide and give to me before you leave, or I have my business card if you wish to email me. That works too. And also, online at our website, you can do the same. So. With that, I'll introduce Will Rutherford from Horizon Development Group, and they will go through, provide a presentation on their proposal. Will?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to make this presentation on a different night. I was quite ill, and unexpectedly so. The last originally scheduled time slot, but I have with me here tonight one of the owners of Horizon, Scott Kwasinski. He works with me on the development team. And what I wanted to do before I got into the details of our proposal is just give you some background on Horizon as an organization. We were started in 1984, have 35 years of experience, and really are experts in senior housing. Our founder actually wrote his master's thesis at the UW on senior housing because at the time he was looking for suitable housing options for his grandmother to downsize from her house. And at the time, senior housing hadn't taken hold. So that was really one of the impetus, or one of his impetuses for forming our company. And since founding, we were originally started as a development group, but grew to add construction and property management divisions. And the reason that I bring this up is obviously that gives us a lot of efficiency internally in terms of being able to share information with people who are going to build and manage the asset. But it really also brings a lot of value to the communities that we work in because it guarantees that we have a continued interest in the project's success, both in planning phases right now, also in the construction process, and then with property management, that we ensure that it's a quality asset that operates successfully. So we've developed over 78 senior housing projects, over 4,200 units of senior housing, and with this proposal, we intend to develop, build, and manage it if selected. So during the RFP process, we looked at the priorities in the RFP, and we did an evaluation of your market. We've been looking at McFarland for quite some time for a similar project to what we're proposing right now. And if you look in your comprehensive plan, what you actually see is that the plan recommends that the village look for a higher density senior housing project in a mixed use environment like the Farwell Street corridor. So when we saw that that was lining up, we decided to propose two different phases of senior housing for this site. The first phase would be a 56 unit market rate independent senior housing project, financed traditionally with first mortgage and investor equity. And the second phase would actually be an affordable senior housing project. Both of these phases will contain some amount of commercial space, which we are open to discussing with the village. But what I wanted to point out first is we saw when we did an analysis of your market that there was a demand for both market rate apartments and affordable housing project or affordable housing units. And the other aspect of the affordable housing project is that the financing for it is not traditional. It's typically financed through a competitive application process with the Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Authority. And we knew that the village was looking for a project that could move forwards on an accelerated time frame to get some value added to the newly created TID 5. So we thought, since there's demand for both market rate and affordable housing, that gave us a great opportunity to try to advance a project, the market rate project, this year, while we were applying for financing for the affordable housing project. So one of the nice features that you'll see in one of the projects that we've developed in this area that would give you a great idea of what both phases would look like on completion is that we have a full calendar of activities that our property manager schedules. And this is a really nice amenity for a lot of seniors who want to feel engaged in the living environment that they're in. So we have things, anywhere from cards to happy hour, book clubs, things of that sort. So the need for senior housing that I spoke about before is not just increasing in McFarland, but it's really all across the nation. The census estimates that by 2030, seniors will take up over 20% of the national population, due mostly to advances in healthcare and an aging baby boomer population. McFarland is actually well ahead of this trend, so they're already, your population as of 2016 was over 20% for seniors. And then, we also looked at the competition in the marketplace for these two types of housing and noticed that there are no other market rate independent senior properties in the village or within a 3-mile radius, and that the most recent affordable housing project in the village was actually constructed in the late 1990s. So we feel both that there's adequate demand from the tenants that we're looking to rent to, and then also there's a small amount of supply to compete with both of these phases. So as I said, phase 1 would have a 56-unit project that would be 4 stories and have approximately 5,000 square feet of commercial space. It would feature underground and surface parking, a common area with a club room. That's where our resident social calendar is planned. There would also be a kitchen, an outdoor patio, a fitness center, and a leasing office. And in some of the plans that you'll see, we actually have an outdoor area that would be constructed between the two phases that would have a garden for residents as well. The second phase would only be 3 stories. It would also contain 5,000 square feet of commercial, but this would be an affordable senior housing project, which I explained before. And really the main difference between a market rate project and an affordable housing project is that your rents with an affordable housing project are actually restricted by law, and in exchange for those reduced rents, you're awarded tax credits, which are sold to an investor, and the proceeds from selling those tax credits are what you use to construct the building. So the affordable housing application process is done on an annual basis through WIDA, and that's why we would try to, as I said, advance the market rate project while we applied for tax credits to build the second phase. The next application cycle would actually take place in December of 2019, and then it's about a 3-month review process, so we wouldn't hear back on tax credits until the spring of 2020. And now, what we're proposing, like I said, we've done this before in been successful in several different markets in Wisconsin, and the closest one to here that's, if anybody wants to schedule a tour, we're happy to do that. It's actually located in Monona, And this is, again, a two-phase project where the first phase we constructed 68 units of affordable housing and then followed that with 51 units of market rate housing. The affordable housing project actually has a wait list of over 37 people, and the market rate project has a wait list of 21 people. So this is just over 3 miles away. We're very confident that this market would be able to absorb what we're proposing, and we think, you know, the wait list at Frostwoods is a good example of some of the pent-up demand in the area. This is our conceptual master plan. So you'll see that the A building on your right is phase 1, and phase 2 is constructed on the left. The pavilion area that you can see in between the buildings is where the garden would go. We anticipate building a structure that would provide a little bit of shade and then also allow residents to enjoy gardening. And then you'll see that there's quite a bit of surface parking here, and partly the reason that drives that is the amount of commercial space. So we needed to have a certain amount of stalls per square foot of commercial space that are constructed, and we wanted to propose adequate parking for whatever user ended up occupying the space. This just shows you a little bit of what the first floor would look like and how that breaks down. And then you'll notice that in both buildings, actually, the second, third, and fourth floors will be all residential. This is just a colored rendering of the two phases and what it might look like on completion. So to speak a little bit more about the number or what our typical resident looks like I said, we've developed over 78 of these projects, and we manage close to 3,000 units in Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois. And this experience really has shown us that when we build a project like this and restrict it to those aged 55 and better, what we end up with is an average resident age at move-in of 76. Only about 75% of our residents still have cars. And people laugh when I say this, but we also average 1.1 persons per unit. And the reason for that is that 80% of our tenants are single women, 10% are single men, and 10% are couples. So that is how you end up with just over a person per unit. The commercial space, we haven't gone too far into this just because of the public nature of this RFP. You can't really negotiate with a commercial tenant when it isn't certain that you're going to be selected as the developer. We did have initial conversations with Angelo's Italian Restaurant and Riley Penner and Benton CPA. They're both existing McFarland businesses that might be interested in occupying some of the commercial space. And then we would also look to source new tenants that don't currently have offices in McFarland. So we think it's particularly important to discuss traffic at this location with the proximity to the McFarland High School up the road. Senior housing is a very low impact use from a traffic standpoint. Comparable properties in our portfolio average less than 1 trip per unit per 12-hour period. And with 1.1 persons per unit in the 96 units that we're proposing, we would expect about 106 residents to live in the two phases when completed. And again, we expect a lot of our underground parking, which is adequate in our opinion, to remain vacant just because only 75% of our residents are still driving. In terms of the overall benefits for a development like this, we think this is an excellent housing location. You all live in McFarland, and I don't need to convince you of the convenience of this address. But specifically for senior housing, it helps to be located in a more of a mixed-use environment like this because it places people in proximity to the amenities in the community and the services that they need on a daily basis. In McFarland, this locates you next to the Pick and Save, several different pharmacies, and shopping. So for the community, what we find to be one of the biggest benefits for this type of housing is that it promotes turnover of the existing housing stock. There are several seniors in the McFarland community who helped build the community, who have lived here, and really they don't want to sell their home because they don't want to have to relocate, and there isn't housing like this available to them in the community. That's the story that we hear very frequently from our residents as to why they stayed in their home past when they were practically able to take care of it. And really, the residents also talk to us about the benefits in terms of companionship and engagement with the social calendar that we plan. The reduced amount of maintenance that they have. I mean, they don't have to clean their gutters, for example, anymore when they move into one of our apartment buildings. And then we try to find locations like this that we're proposing right now that places them, in convenient places within their community with respect to the amenities that they need on a daily basis. So, thank you for the opportunity to present. I'm happy to go back. I figured I would go back to the site plan just in case anybody had any questions about the design. And then also, I may direct some of your questions to Scott as well, but thank you again, and please let me know if you have any questions.
So if anyone would like to ask questions in this setting to Will or to Scott, we'd just ask you to go up to the microphone if that were the case. You can do so now. Otherwise, if you wanted to ask them directly in a more informal setting, you could do that after this concludes. They'll stick around here for a little bit, or you could talk to them some more. But if anyone's interested in asking some questions, certainly welcome you to come up to the podium and let them have it.
So I have actually a question for George. I have a couple of statements I'd like to make, not necessarily questions for this group. Yeah, I will
Yes.
know that that's the case. It's more, I think there's some folks that are in the community board here that I'd like to just make some comments about.
If you would like to do that, I'll just reiterate what you said, just so it's on the. You wanted to make some statements about the projects in general and make sure that boards, committees, commissions responsible for review can hear them. I would answer that by certainly you can do that, encourage you to do that now, but also if you wanted to fill out a form, I could include that as part of the record
I
as
can
well.
do it quickly
Okay.
now. So my name is Vicki Kampmeyer, and I own the buildings directly behind, the apartment buildings directly behind your project. And I heard the other project last week, and I'm much more supportive of this project for a couple of reasons. One is I don't look at them as competitive for the tenants that I'm trying to attract. So this is much more, from my perspective, right, it gives me, I'm not competing with you guys. The second piece is I have a father who was in Heritage in Monona, and he's 80 years old, lost his driver's license. And one day I thought he was thriving there in Monona, but one day he said to me, Vicki, he said, either help me figure out how to go home, which is in McFarland, or I'm going to take a taxi and bring myself home. The reason for that is because all the people he knows are in McFarland, but there's nowhere for him to go. I can guarantee you if he knew this was being built, he would seriously consider it. He is so social, right? All those activities he would engage in. He can walk across the street to Angelo's, he can walk to the bowling alley, he can walk to the grocery store, but without his license, it's all on me right now. And I know that he would move into something like this. So I support your proposal.
If all goes well, maybe he'll only have to go downstairs to Angelo's.
Certainly don't want to rush anybody, but if there's anyone else, yeah. Yes, Kathy. Could I have you come up here?
I'm Kathy Kirby. I'm a current member of the Plan Commission. And my comments are really aimed more at the CDA committee, the Plan Commission, and the Village Board. In that I think that having a senior housing development would be a great asset to the village. My questions are, or thoughts, are more related to the development of this piece of property, whether the village has taken into account the two businesses, the one on either side, the hardware store and Ken's Automotive, thinking about what kind of the long-range plan is for that entire strip as opposed to just what has always been called the Gannon property. And also the impact of this development on Farwell Street. And I see two impacts that I would have questions about. One is that it's 4 stories, which is going to tower over anything else on that entire street. Everything else is 1 story or 1.5 stories. Number 2 is the traffic that it's going to generate on what is a main corridor in McFarland. I know that your studies show that seniors who are over 76 go out maybe once a day. I beg to differ with that. I think they go out, those that are still driving probably go out more than that. They go out to the grocery store, they go play cards, they go out to eat, whatever. So I have some concerns about the traffic impact on Farwell. And the size, 96 units is a lot. It's nice that we have the mix of housing, but 96 units is a lot. And if you take just one car, that's 100 cars going out once a day minimum. It's definitely going to have an impact on Farwell Street, and you're going to also be dealing with senior drivers. So I have some concerns in that respect too. So I think that these are all great ideas, and I think they should be followed up. But my concern is that we're rushing into a project. We're already being asked to pick between 2 projects when I'm not sure we're there yet. And so my question to the village is, what's the rush? That piece of property has been sitting there for many years unused, and I would encourage the village board and the CDA to take their time and do it right as opposed to do it fast. And to maybe perhaps put out some more RFPs, see if you could maybe generate something that's a little bit more commercial, that we get a little bit more than 10,000 square feet of commercial space, or get something that's sized a little smaller. You showed us pictures in Monona of Frostwoods, which is 3 stories high, which to me is plenty high, and we're talking about going a story above that. With this project. So again, my comments are more around let's not rush this, let's make sure we do it right, and that we consider the parcels on either side and consider the traffic impact and do all of our homework before we start approving potential developers of that piece of property.
Absolutely, and I'll absolutely get to that question. There is one component of your comment that I think I could speak to, specifically as it relates to our internal traffic statistics. And people, as developers of senior housing, we very frequently run into that same question, which is, well, I know somebody who's 76 years old, or I am 76 years old, and I sure go out a whole lot more than you're representing right now. One thing that I would say is that you might not already, I'm assuming that you don't live in an independent senior housing facility like ours, and I think that a lot of times what we notice is people who move into our apartments do so because they're at a different stage in their life, and that usually correlates to how often they use their vehicle if they still own a vehicle, which is, for example, with a couple, frequently we'll see one of the couples has taken a spill and isn't getting around so much anymore. So the need for having two cars, for example, is much lower. And people oftentimes who are trying to downsize and get away from, the maintenance responsibilities of a home are also frequently going out less. Those are the best ways that we can describe that. And then to speak to why we decided to go 4 stories, one reason that I would say drove that is that in order to get a project financed for our market rate, for the market rate phase, we felt that we needed additional density while still leaving room for the second phase. That had or sort of put us in a position where we would have to request additional support from the village if we were going to build a smaller number of units. So that really motivated us to consider a 4th story option for the first phase.
Then my next question is, if you apply for tax credits, if you don't receive them, I'm assuming you're not going to be able to proceed, or would it be delayed even further to build phase 2 with all that additional purchases?
Well, I think
Could I have you ask it up here, just so we can hear it? Thank you.
My next question is phase 2 is based on the receiving of tax credits, and you've already mentioned how competitive that process is. So if you apply and you don't get any, are you planning on applying in the future, or is that property going to stay vacant, or what would be the next phase or plan then for that project as that sat vacant?
so. The affordable housing process is very competitive, and we typically have submitted, we're also very good at identifying sites that will be competitive, and we think this is a location that would be competitive, but sometimes it's taken us as many as 3 or 4 different times applying at one location, which on an annual process, that can really delay the construction of a project by a considerable amount of time, which is why we thought it was going to be such a strong benefit for us to propose a traditionally financed market rate project that we could move forwards with right away. But to answer your question, we would continue to apply for tax credits. And really, we believe this is a successful location. It's in terms of us guaranteeing that this is a project that would move forwards right away after we applied it, it would be unfair of us to represent that, so. Yeah.
Scott Kwasinski with Horizon. I just want to add on to a couple of the things that Will's talking about, which I appreciate. You're right. You're pointing out a reality in that we may not receive tax credits even if the site is competitive, and it just depends on what other applications go in that year and what the competitive profile is for that particular round. And Will's correct is that we could easily reapply, and we've done that in the past. And I've been involved with projects that have taken 2 and 3 different cycles to get approved, but we would evaluate that on a year-by-year basis, and it could make the most sense, for example, we could be doing yet another phase of market rate. If the first phase takes off and we lease everything up, we could switch at that point in time and say, you know what, we applied for the tax credit, we did what we said we're going to do, we just didn't get the credit itself, so we could switch to a revised proposal at that point in time to go ahead and make sure that the second phase gets done. Or I guess ultimately there's still a risk that nothing gets done, and that's a possibility as well. If the market rate doesn't do as well, and if the tax credit doesn't happen, these are all sort of worst case scenarios, but that's a possibility. Another comment that I wanted to point out about the traffic on Farwell, and Will's correct in a lot of the things that he's pointing out. I wanted to also add that with a senior-specific population, it's the case that, yes, there's trips, and we know that there's going to be trips generated by this particular development. What we've found in other properties that we've developed, however, is that those trips are generally not competing with the 8 o'clock and 5 o'clock type more business and school traffic that you would otherwise see. The trips that we've studied our seniors taking is trips to the grocery store, trips to the doctor's office, dentists, and other appointments. And generally, we find that those appointments are, 9, 10, 11 o'clock, or sometime in the early afternoon hours, where you're not necessarily competing with the same space as those that may be traveling for business or for school reasons. I think that was all that I wanted to say, and I'll just sort of reiterate, generally from Horizon's standpoint, this is a community and a location that we're extremely interested in. We see a lot of potential with this development site, and I think we've laid out a concept here that makes a lot of sense, and I think is very supportable both demographically and financially if we can get all the numbers to work out. And I think it really could be a successful project. So although we're not in McFarland right now, we really want to be, and we think this could be a successful spot for us to do that.
Okay, I mean, if there's any other questions, we could certainly do that now. Otherwise, Will and Scott will be here. I'll stick around till 6:30. I have to go across the hall. Okay, I have to go across the hall for another meeting, but go ahead.
I just had a question about the timing for applying for tax credits and how that works. Could you talk us through that process a little bit? And so, say we awarded this, pick an award date. What do those cycles look like? Because I know that's an annual cycle for that. So, how does the timing fall together?
So the next application process that we know for certain, there may be another one that's scheduled a little bit sooner because the state recently passed a new law that creates a different tax credit that you can apply for. But we know for certain that the next application cycle will be in December of 2019. So what we would do if awarded is we would submit a number of financing applications before that cycle to what we call soft financing sources. And those applications would be due in June. One would be to Dane County, and another would be to the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago. And those would be to help cover the gap that's created in your financing from restricting your rents. Then we would apply for tax credits in December of 2019 and would hear back by the end of March in 2020. And at that point, we would have to move through the design process and look for a closing time of approximately October or November of 2020. And then we would anticipate a 10 to 12 month construction time period. So the project would be open and operating in the fall of 2021.
Can you speak to your success in obtaining county affordable housing dollars and the federal tax credits? I know they're separate programs, but.
Sure. Horizon has yet to apply for county affordable housing dollars, but in terms of our success with low-income housing tax credits, we've developed 55 affordable housing projects since the low-income housing tax credit was created in 1986. Most recently, I think we were awarded 3 projects in the 2017 round. We applied for 2 projects this time around. So really, we've been very successful. And I think the county affordable housing program, we've evaluated the priorities in that plan, and we think that this project would be a competitive application in that process as well. So.
Okay, if there's there's nothing else, thank everybody for coming tonight. Scott and Will, if you have some follow-up questions you'd like to ask them more directly as we conclude here, certainly do so, encourage you to do so. There's comment sheets by the front door if you want to fill those out and leave them with myself or Pauline. Again, I'll be here till about 6:30. I just have to go across the hall for another meeting. Otherwise, we're available to answer questions later in the week also. Yes, you're welcome.
Thank you very
Yep,
much.
thanks for being here. Appreciate
Yeah.
it.